Welcome back, everyone, and welcome to Saturday Morning Sangha. I probably should have done this at the beginning, but what the heck. This is our final week this time around discussing the second noble truth, the truth of knowing the cause of suffering. We've been going through the Eightfold Path, and now we're going more in detail. And in that examination of the Eightfold Path, we're becoming more familiar with the Four Noble Truths. This being the second. The first being that there is suffering in life, and this one being that we know the causes of suffering. The third is that there is a way to address that. We can escape the suffering. And the fourth being the Dhamma and the Eightfold Path as a way to do that. We've heard great discussions from Tracy and Joy, my sisters in this effort. And this is just another look. It's not as though there is not one right view. These are views, and it is my hope that these discussions and this practice helps you to find your way. What we say is hopefully inspiration for you to go on that quest, but what's really important is what truths you find for yourself in the process of our becoming. So I titled my my talk today, Three Journeys, I think, and the Root of Suffering. 3 short journeys. And the first journey I wanted to talk about was one that the Buddha discussed. And this was the day or morning after he had sat and with the resolve to understand what was going on. And he had achieved that. He was walking home or wherever he was going, and he encountered a boy, probably a herdsman. And it was someone he knew, sort of, and the boy said, you look different. What's going on? Are you a god? And the Buddha said, no, I'm not a god. I'm a man. And he said, well, then are you a saint? And he said, no, I'm not a saint. I'm a man. And the boy recognized that he was changed still and said, well, what do I call you? What are you? And he said, just say that I'm awake. And that's the journey that we're all on, the journey to awakening. When he sat for that evening before, when he was trying to understand, he encountered, Mara. He encountered distractions and saw the human condition that we're all in, that, we suffer the pain of birth, we suffer life, we suffer death, we suffer losing everything, we suffer impermanence. It's not that life is all that, but life contains all of that. And he saw this cause and effect relationship between pain and suffering. Now, I use the terms pain and suffering advisedly. It's also been interpreted as pain has also been interpreted or seen as dissatisfaction or unskillfulness, a number of other things, but they all come under this heading. And I'm going to use the terms pain and suffering just for convenience in this discussion. But one of the important things to see about this is the difference between pain and suffering. That's one of the things that the Buddha understood and brought to light as important. He talked about the first and second arrows. The first arrow being, we're shot with an arrow and there's pain. And that's the reality of that moment, that pain. And then the second arrow is the suffering. And that's what we bring to the pain. A worry about, like, was the arrow poisoned? Am I going to be able to walk again? Will this be painful for the rest of my life? Is it going to kill me? All of that is just the second arrow, the suffering that we bring to it. And in order to deal with that, we need to see it clearly. We can bring about change. But not until we see clearly what we're working with. We've talked about, some of what gets in the way of that. But right now, let's just look at that. When we think about pain and suffering, the thinking mind is using all of that background that we had, that pre-existing overlay, that interpretation of our experience that's been happening since we were born. We ascribe meaning to stuff, and those meanings that are ascribed to everything are really filters, and that's how we see things. The reality of our experience is much more basic than that. When we sit and just experience the pain, we get to know it. When we sit and get to experience the suffering, we know that. It's not thinking, it's experiencing what's happening in the moment. That's what the Buddha was doing. He was sitting and experiencing, noticing his experience. We talk about the difference between suffering your experience and experiencing your suffering. And we need to know our suffering and experience it, but not be the victim of it, not suffer our experience. We'll come back to that some. The second short journey that I wanted to talk about, I've talked about before, but I think not in this context, maybe. And that was one that I had when I was in Vietnam. And it was a moment of my experiencing extreme violence. And I won't get into the details about that, but it started and ended very abruptly. And I didn't know that I needed to understand that. It didn't occur to me. I walked away from that experience back to a vehicle that I was using. And that moment after that was very clear. I remember walking that distance. I remember every detail. And I also remember that it was, like a very hot day. It was probably in the dry season, as I remember. And it wasn't something I understood that I had to make sense of. It was just a raw experience. But by the time I got back to that Jeep, I was sort of trying to make sense of it. But what was happening was I was experiencing all three forms of that, craving, wanting things to be different, resisting reality, and delusion. I had gone to Vietnam because, well, I volunteered. I wanted to do what my country said needed to be done. In order to graduate from public high school in the town I grew up in, you needed to have a minimum of 2 years of military science. That was a required subject. And every intersection in town had a plaque with a star and the name of someone who had died in combat in a war from town. It didn't occur to me not to go. I wanted to do what was right. It didn't occur to me until then that what I was doing wasn't right. Although my intention was, I think, pure for the moment, to say what I was doing was unskillful was a real understatement. That combined with part of what I did, because I spoke and read the language, was I went through a lot of documents that were captured. And one of them was a diary from this young man who had been a member of the Viet Cong. His family had been at war with the Viet Minh, the French, when they occupied the country. And he was an orphan because of that war. The military had adopted him and taken care of him. That was his family. And his first diary was something that he had a mimeographed kind of photo of Ho Chi Minh, and he had colored that in, and he put his motto under there. This is a kid that there is no fortress which cannot be conquered by the Bolshevik. Loose translation, but that's what it was. And at that moment, it occurred to me that we had no business there. We had no coin there. We certainly weren't invited to his country. And that that the continued violence was the beginning of my being politicized. And that was a result of my looking more clearly at what I was doing, looking more clearly at my education. I hadn't put that in terms of seeing clearly, but that's what was going on. And then the third little journey that I wanted to talk about was the journey that I took just a short while ago, having been on retreat for a while and avoiding the news, avoiding anything from outside of the practice. I had no idea really what was going on in the world during that time, although I assumed it wasn't great. And came out of that and sat with my sisters, Joy, Tracy, and Booker, and heard a lot of the things that had been going on. I had heard something about violence taking place 7 days in a row, and then I heard that it had been 7 instances of mass killing, mass shootings. And there was a lot more to the story, of course. And at that time, I got to sit with that difficulty, sit with that pain and suffering that I was in at the moment, and sitting with my feelings of what do I do? I felt really lost. How do I address this? What's going on? The difference was that I was aware that there was something going on that I needed to sit with. The bitter was was right there. The pain was there, the suffering was there, not just mine, but the pain and suffering of, those around me who had been exposed to this. Realizing that in that moment, I was not seeing clearly, that I needed to sit with it, was something that I really appreciate. What came out of it was that I needed to act skillfully. And beside being committed to feeding the hungry, which has been a big issue for me, I also need to get more strongly involved in doing what I can about social justice. One of the things I'd done before in my life was to be an organizer, and I think I need to get back to that. I had believed that it was, the younger people's turn to do that, but I think I need to get re-involved again. And it's not what I think anyone else should do. And none of this is. This is about what occurred to me, what happened to me in my process of sitting with the reality of the moment and seeing what arises. And what arose out of that was the right thing to do.